Committee, and we're about to take up amendment to H2. We are going to hear from Eric first on one matter, but before we get to that, I just want to clear something up that I think there may have been a misunderstanding or last week suggesting that the governor is supportive of raise the age. I want to make very clear, I understand that at least since 2024, the governor has been clear that he feels that the administration, that we made a mistake in passing raise the age. Their proposal is to repeal raise the age. I think it came up last week, the fact that the governor did originally sign the law into effect, I think 2018. But I do understand that since that time, the administration has changed its mind, and that's perfectly fine as people get more information and see how things are being implemented, that they can change their mind on something. So, but I just want to make sure that that's clear on the record, and I will put onto our website an email that further addresses that from Attorney Jay Johnson as well. But just want to make that very clear.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
A quick question about that.
Yeah.
So my understanding is the governor wants to repeal part of raise the age, right? Does he want to repeal the whole?
I think that the omnibus bill just repeals the to 19, if I'm right. It repeals that next. So being clear on that, I think that there's not pushing to move back from the 18-year-olds, because I think we've had now a few years of experience of that. And that seems to be working largely fine, although there are some issues with that we're hopefully trying to address. So with that clarification, we will just, Eric has another additional clarification. So over to you, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Lalonde. Good afternoon, everybody. Eric Fitzpatrick with the Office of Legislative Counsel. Nice to see you today. As the chair was mentioning, I'm returning to an issue that had come up, I think it was Thursday, it may have been Friday, but I think actually it was Thursday afternoon, having to do with Representative Lalonde's proposed amendment to H2. You may recall there's a number of different components to the amendment. Some involve the raise the age issue that was just discussed. Some involve the jurisdiction over juveniles in the family division. And a couple of them, though, involve transfer of proceedings from the family division to the criminal division. Remember, there's a couple of different pieces that do that. One of them involves what was referred to or is referred to as an expedited transfer, and that permits transfer from the family division to the criminal division in certain cases after the juvenile has been adjudicated and if there have been multiple violations of probation. There's another piece of it that you may recall also involves youthful offenders, not the same sort of transfer, but it does allow for a conversion of a juvenile proceeding in the family division to a youthful offender proceeding. So those are these two things that are in the bill, in the proposed amendment that you have in front of you. And so what I'm here to talk about, as the chair asked me to do, to clarify something that came up last week, thanks to the watchful legal eye of Representative Arsenault, initially, having to do with the double jeopardy clause. And so you recall what I just mentioned involved two different situations in the bill, one of which clearly is a transfer from the family division to the criminal division. The other is a motion to convert a proceeding that's in the family division to the criminal division. And it raised the issue of double jeopardy. In other words, can someone be tried twice for the same offense? Can they be put in jeopardy twice for the same offense? And Representative Arsenault asked about that last week. In response to which, since I had not yet researched the issue, I should have said, excellent question, Representative Arsenault. Let me look into that and I'll get back to you. But I did not. I answered off the top of my head, which I shouldn't have done. Apologies for that. But thankfully, Representative Arsenault did spot it. And thanks to Marshall Paul as well, who provided us with the citation to a case that was right on point, which does specifically provide that that when you think of jeopardy, just backing up for a second, as I say, it can't be put twice in jeopardy for the same offense. So it requires a first offense and a second offense, right? So the question legitimately that came up was, well, is that first offense, if it's a juvenile case in the family division, not technically the same thing as a criminal case, does that count as offense number one? for the purposes of a second offense, a second charge that would put the person in jeopardy? The answer to that question is yes. That was something that the case that Marshall referred everyone to, the United States Supreme Court case Breed v. Jones, clearly said, yes, a juvenile proceeding does count as step one, you might think of it as, on the sort of chronology of, well, would a second charge then implicate the double jeopardy clause? Interesting point, though, about that is that's issue number one. And if you think about it, if you've got two different proceedings, the question in legal terms is often framed as, does jeopardy attach? When does jeopardy attach? And what that really means is, at what stage of that first proceeding does it count as the first proceeding? Is it at the very first time the person comes in the courthouse door? Is it not until the time of conviction? Is it, there's a number of different sort of places on that timeline, which could conceivably be the measuring point where jeopardy first attaches. So for a criminal proceeding, that question was answered in the Breed v. Jones case, and even more helpfully, there's a case that I sent to Nate for posting, which you all have. It's on the website now, a Vermont Supreme Court case called In Re JG, which specifically dealt with that exact same question. So, and this has an impact on the proposed amendment to H2. So for juvenile proceedings, when the jeopardy, when the first proceeding reaches a point where jeopardy attaches, is very clearly stated both in the Breed case and in this In Re JG case. And I'll just read it to you for a moment because it's helpful to hear. And this is from the Vermont Supreme Court in 1993. It says that a transfer of a juvenile matter from family court to district court, which at the time it was district court, it was before judicial restructuring, we used the family division, criminal division terminology, and the trial of the juvenile as an adult following an adjudication of delinquency. So that's the key point. Following an adjudication of delinquency violates the double jeopardy clause of the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution. The court goes on to say, not every hearing in family court will preclude transfer to district court. As Jones makes clear, that's referring to that U.S. Supreme Court case Jones. Transfer prior to an adjudicatory hearing should not raise double jeopardy concerns. Therefore, our holding does not affect pre-adjudication transfer proceedings so long as no adjudication in fact results. And that was the same point that the U.S. Supreme Court made in Breed v. Jones, which is for juvenile proceedings, that's their key point, whether or not there's been an adjudication of delinquency or not. So it's not when the petition is first filed, but it is once there's been an adjudication. So if you think of what's an adjudication like, in the criminal court, it's sort of like, it's sort of analogous to a finding of guilt or innocence, that sort of point on the timeline. So that's the key point to keep in mind when you're thinking about, well, what are our options that are available to us as far as H2, the amendment to H2. For example, if you looked at section 12, that's the one about the expedited transfer from family division to criminal division. The way that's framed right now, the motion can be filed after the juvenile has been adjudicated delinquent and they've violated the terms of their probation twice. See that? So that is barred by this double jeopardy clause decisions in the two cases I just mentioned. So because the way it's framed right now is it's after adjudication. So if you were to still want to pursue this kind of approach, to create an option for a transfer from the family division to the criminal division, on an expedited basis for a number of factors, whatever they may be, you could do that, but it would have to be pre-adjudication. So it would have to be before that moment. So whatever factors or criteria you think might, or standards you might use for that sort of transfer, I think there's some flexibility there, but the timing wise, it has to be pre-adjudication. But within that sort of range within that period of time, I think there is an opportunity, if you choose to do it, to possibly craft something similar to this, as long as you didn't cross that adjudicatory point in the time. Does that make sense? Yes. In terms of how it would work? I think the second piece, the conversion of a juvenile proceeding to a youthful offender proceeding, that's another piece of the bill, another section of it. The way that's framed, that does happen pre-adjudication, the way it is set up and structured within the statute where it's placed. So I don't think the double jeopardy issue comes up there the way it's framed right now. I mean, you could always add language if you wanted, just to be clear. A motion may be filed, prior to adjudication if you really want it to be extra clear that that was the case. But I think the way it's framed now, it happens pre-adjudication anyway. So I think there's the double jeopardy issue doesn't come up there the way that it does in the expedited transfer section.
So essentially, section 2 is not quite right.
Right.
And we'll take any input from various witnesses on ideas. The bottom line is what we're trying to do there is fill a gap that we felt that we were seeing with our testimony earlier this session as far as accountability with respect to the 18, 19-year-old ages. So, all right, any questions for Eric? Yeah, Ian, go ahead.
Is a deferred sentence considered an adjudication at the time that the deferred sentence is ordered?
I'm going to give the answer. I could have given last week. Don't know, but I can look into that.
Any other questions for Eric? I don't see any. Thank you very much, Eric.
Yeah.
Live and learn, I always say.
It's so true. Only.
So we will now turn to, I guess, Commissioner Winters is not here, but has some backup that is here online. Should we start with you, Deputy Commissioner Radke?
Yes, that'd be great. And I'll just make some brief comments and then I'm going to be turning it over to Lindy Boudreau. But just in listening to Eric speak, part of what I wanted to, I should start off by saying, good afternoon, Chair Lalonde and members of the Judiciary Committee. For the record, my name is Erica Radke. I'm Deputy Commissioner of the Family Services Division of DCF. What I was going to say is just listening to Eric talk about wrangling with the issue of double jeopardy. And what I wanted to express was my appreciation just for the committee and the thoughtful way that you all have looked at H2 and making amendments to it, because it really does make me feel like our team has been heard in our prior testimony. And I should say as well that I do have with me here today Lindy Boudreau, the director of our Adolescent Services Unit, and Tyler Allen, the director of our High-End System of Care Unit. And we're really grateful for the approach that the committee has taken, particularly given the time pressures that are at play here. And I'd like to say that DCF's values are in alignment with a number of sections of H2. And while I'm going to be turning it over to Lindy to really talk in detail about our perspective, I do want to express one thing, that we are appreciative of the 2-year delay in the bill. But I also need to acknowledge that we can't really guarantee that in the next 2 years, our system of care is going to have that robust foundation to support the additional youth, which is one of the reasons the administration had proposed repealing Raise the Age for 19-year-olds. But we do believe that a delay is better policy, though, than moving forward with an April 1st implementation. And with that, I do want to turn it over to Lindy to discuss the salient points of the bill. And I should note that Tyler's on hand to support that effort, as well as just to answer any questions geared toward the high-end system of care, which sometimes do come up when we start to talk about Raise the Age and YO. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lindy.
All right, before you do, just if I could, so one of the things, and if it is other witnesses testifying on this, I know when we took up H2 before the amendments related to Raise the Age, there was section 1 is what was in the original bill of H2. And we hadn't had a chance yet for DCF to weigh in on that part. So whoever's going to weigh in on that, certainly I want to understand where DCF stands with respect to section 1 of the bill.
Lindy's going to be able to talk some numbers about how many youth that would impact, but we are absolutely in support of that section in terms of, making sure we're moving from 12 to 10, because our perspective is youth that age, if they're committing some type of delinquency, generally that's trauma-based, and we would think it's more important generally to have a more restorative approach as opposed to a carceral approach.
All right, thank you.
So, thank you, Erica. So for the record, I'm Lindy Boudreau. I'm the Adolescent Services Director. I prepared a couple of thoughts related to this section. So if it's okay with the committee, I'd read those and take questions.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, so as Erica mentioned, DCF does support the increase in the minimum age for delinquency from 10 to 12. In the last 5 years, we've only had 5 youth that have actually worked with DCF who've been on probation, who are between the ages of 10 and 11. Regarding section 2, DCF's neutral on the idea of extending jurisdiction by a year for youth ages 16 through 18. The extra year may have a positive impact for some youth. However, if a youth does not want to engage, they can choose not to, and the system's response remains limited. So it would not increase accountability for lack of engagement, but it would provide a longer term for youth who are potentially wanting to engage with the system and may just have a slower start. As Commissioner Radke, Deputy Commissioner Radke, just gave her an upgrade, mentioned in regards to delay of the implementation of Raise the Age, we appreciate the delay, and she provided thoughts in relation to that as far as the position of the administration being that repealing is a better policy position.
So before you go on, I apologize, Lindy. Just backing up, I want to make sure I understood. Section 2, is DCF on board with that increase to 20 years and to 21 years?
Yeah, I mean, we're neutral. We're not against it. We're not for it. I'm not sure that it's going to have the intended impact. It does not. In our opinion, it doesn't change accountability for youth who choose not to engage, but it does provide an opportunity for them to have a longer term should they, initially not engage, but have a change of heart. So I guess I would say that we support it.
So, do you have any opinion on whether that's the right amount of an increase? Because I know we'll probably hear from other testimony of what some other states do, and often it's even up to the age of 25, which we're a long ways away from that. But is there any opinion on an appropriate upper ceiling of the age?
Part of what would happen with this, with the additional year, is that if we do achieve the 19-year-old, then jurisdiction would go beyond our current youthful offender status. So I would just say that might make it a little confusing. So I would say 22 at this point might be the upper ceiling, just to be in alignment with our current practice related to youthful offenders.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
So let me see. So, and I understand that there's been some changes to what Eric just put out in relation to the issues of accountability. But so we're interested in exploring additional measures of accountability, but feel that those policy decisions should take place in the context of a separate bill, which DCF would like to work with the committee on this session following the passage of H2, given that there's a sense of urgency with the April 1st deadline coming. So we believe that the best way to address the concerns related to the ping pong effect is to return to the process that we had for many years prior to the changes that went into effect in 2018, which is to have a conditional plea of guilty in the criminal division in order for youth to be considered for youthful offender status. I know the Defender General's Office has outlined concerns about the constitutionality of this practice. However, we have no state law in Vermont that prohibits conditional pleas. This is a practice for 9 years and it was never litigated. Returning to this practice would eliminate 2 hearings in the family division and would cut the process down for youth to be placed on youthful offender probation significantly. It would also reduce the concerns with youth who may not engage with DCF and DOC because they're taking a level of responsibility and accountability for their actions right from the outset.
So then this is, just to be clear, this is section 13 of the bill, is that right?
Yes.
And also, I want to make sure I understand, are you supportive of this language, or are you suggesting another approach?
I'm suggesting another approach, which is a conditional plea of guilty.
Okay. All right.
And I'll open it up for questions.
Well, let me ask just one follow-up real quick. I mean, do you have proposed language of how that would be accomplished for the section 13 for the ping pong effects? Or is that something that we'd be able to have legislative counsel Eric Fitzpatrick contact you if we decide that that's an alternative we want to pursue?
Yes, I think if he reached out, that would be great.
Other questions? Sorry, I was asking all the questions. Other questions from the committee? Yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
So I understand sort of the caveat or the warning of like, you have no way of knowing in 2 years if a robust system will be in place. But I'm confident there won't be one in place if we just repealed it and we didn't leave it in place, because it's something that if the legislature chooses to go in this direction, it's something that we want. And so I'm wondering, how can we be of assistance? And I know that the commissioner works at the pleasure of the governor, but if there are ways that we can help advocate for the funding, for the robust resources to be in place, it would be great to figure out how we can work with you to accomplish that. And I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
No, I appreciate that a great deal. And it's sort of what we need is a lot of what we're doing now, more consideration, more talking, and being able to have that space to do it well, right? Um, and I do think that we're going to continue making our efforts to strengthen the system of care. I do think one of the things that would help us is a different cadence of reporting. We spend a lot of time creating reports when we could continue to be working with the team on, making sure we're doing the best that we can to serve the youth. So that's one thing that's pretty concrete we'd like to mention. And Lindy, do you have anything to add on that?
No, like you said, I mean, the information that we've outlined in the reports that we've been submitting really is our efforts that we're going to continue to try to move forward, regardless of the delay. So just on that.
And I just share because, as for the record, my name is Tyler Allen. I'm the high-end system of care director for Family Services Division. And I just want to appreciate the attention that this committee and other legislators have brought to DCF's kind of regular reporting around how we're trying to develop our high end of the system of care. Those processes are underway. And I just like to share that a lot of those processes are agency level initiatives where there's a lot of collaboration with the Departments of Health, the Departments of Aging and Independent Living to stabilize what we refer to as our high-end system of care. So I just appreciate the attention. I don't think I have a concrete ask in terms of resource or where the advocacy should be, but I do want to appreciate and acknowledge the attention that has come to the needs, the kind of streamlined approach to system of care development.
So Tyler, given that and I forgot that your title involves high end, so that phrase is a phrase that is fairly new to me, and I'm just wondering if you can explain it, because my first thought is it the most expensive youth that you're serving, or the ones that have the most needs? There's something that I find troubling about that, and I'm just trying to figure out what it means first, because maybe it's not troubling.
So I can answer that question. It's probably a term of art that comes out of DCF. It specifically has to do with those youth who have the highest acuity needs. And when we talk about high-end system of care, we talk about young people who we have trouble finding residential or community-based programming for because of the confluence of needs that's going on with them. It's not exclusively a placement crisis. It's not exclusively a behavioral crisis. It's not exclusively a mental health crisis or a delinquency matter. It's often all four of those things kind of crashing into each other. And the reality is that there are limited numbers of providers who will take cases where there are many of those conditions kind of co-occurring. So it's very common that a youth might have a developmental need, but there is a level of aggression as part of their case presentation that is a barrier to be able to find programming for them, for example. So when we talk about high-end system of care from a DCF perspective, we're talking about a crisis response network largely. I think it's very common that these become the most expensive types of placements, but I think it is better framed as it is kind of the the confluence of high acuity needs that come together, and it's the minority of cases. It's a relatively small number, but they are youth who need supports and services all the same. And so we're trying to develop a network that can be responsive to young people that have co-occurring needs.
And I would add on to that, it is the way Mr. Allen said it may end up being the amount of money being spent, but it really is the level of acuity, intense level of supports and services that are needed for these kiddos. And what happens is we end up spending a lot of time to try to make sure they're well placed. And then that sort of has a ripple impact down on the rest of our system, because then we may not have additional placements for other youth because we're putting these youth in placements. So it really does impact the entirety of the system, which is why we focus there in order to try to stabilize everything ultimately.
Yeah, go ahead, second question.
This is actually going to Lindy, and just following up on the testimony on the conditional mechanism of the conditional guilty plea to move from criminal to family. I didn't catch this quite, but did you say that this was in effect for 9 years, or it was phased out 9 years ago? And I'm just curious if you can kind of expand on the policy, the practice, the history around it, why it was phased out, and I guess just more general knowledge on that policy.
Yeah, so when youthful offender was created, the practice or the policy related to youthful offender status was that cases started in the criminal division, and youth who wanted to be considered for youthful offender probation would enter into a conditional plea of guilty, and the case would come to the family division and go straight to disposition. And so at that time, the three factors that we're currently using at the youthful offender consideration hearing, we used at disposition, which are one, first being, can public safety be afforded if this youth is given youthful offender probation? Two, is the youth amenable to treatment? And three, is there services within the juvenile justice system to serve this youth as a youthful offender? So those were the considerations. If all three things were a go, then the youth would be placed on youthful offender probation. And if the youth was successful in completing the probation, then the case was done. The conditional plea all of that was removed. If the youth was not successful, then we could petition for a revocation. If the case was revoked, they would lose their youthful offender status, and the case would return to criminal division for sentencing. In 2018, when we made the changes related to expansion of youthful offender eligibility, we also modified the process. So at that point, we removed the conditional plea of guilty, and we created the process that we currently have, which is for the youth to either have a direct file petition in family division as a youthful offender, which is determined by the state's attorney, or upon motion from criminal division to then come to family division for consideration for youthful offender status. And so at that point, it's a pre-merits hearing because there is no conditional plea. So we have this 3 criteria that I just mentioned that we used to have at disposition, we have prior to a merits hearing. So we're essentially given the youthful offender status before there's an adjudication, or before there's findings that the incident occurred. So when I mentioned we've created 2 new processes, that's what we've created as far as court hearings. I'm sure Marshall will have thoughts on why this changed. I know there was concerns mentioned at the time about the numbers of youth who would be interested in exploring youthful offender status because of the conditional plea. That was for some youth, that was a reason that they would not want to have youthful offender status. I'm not sure if at the time the concerns regarding constitutionality had arisen or not. Again, as I mentioned, that has not been litigated in Vermont. So that could have been an avenue, but it was not pursued. So I'm not entirely sure all of the reasons behind that.
That's very helpful. And just one follow-up question, in terms of the 3 qualifications for someone to merit the consideration, was that done by DCF or was that done by the court, by the judge, or was it a combination of both?
So either the previous practice or now there's a report written by DCF.
Okay.
And we make recommendations in relation to those 3 areas. And the court obviously makes the final decision about whether or not they support our recommendation. And they don't always support our recommendation.
Great. Thank you very much.
Angela.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to see if I'm sorry that Commissioner Winters couldn't be here because I am going to ask a question related to something that he said. So I don't mean to put you all on the spot. But last April, Commissioner Winters was testifying on S58, and he offered a list of 5 things that would need to be in place for DCF to expand, raise the age effectively, I believe. 1 was operating a secure facility. 2 had to do with family services workforce challenges. He mentioned specifically 6 additional workers who were needed and mentioned 30 vacancies at the time. 3 was barge expansion. 4 was age-specific transitional housing. And 5, comprehensive child welfare information system. So I know you've been reporting on progress in some of these areas, and hearing that you could not commit to the word comfortable comes to mind, and I know that's not the word. Effective, I guess, is an effective expansion of raise the age even in 2 years. I'm just wondering if these 5 still apply, if there are additional items that should be on this list, if we keep all these 5 and add, or has any of this, do you feel like you're on the road to resolution with any of these areas? Just like, I don't know how to feel confident that anyone, like, the bill is asking, I'll be asked to vote on a 2-year delay. And one of the reasons for that delay is because we don't want to set this up for failure. We don't want to set anyone up, the youth or DCF, up for failure if we expand to 19. And I'm just not sure how to feel confident that there is even a true desire for this to succeed.
Thank you for that. I appreciate what you're saying, and I can see your perspective. What I can tell you is when we've been writing the report, there has been progress, slow but incremental progress, sort of like with the workforce. That was one of the things you mentioned. Our vacancies have gone down. We have a workforce development director. It's just that these things are slow but steadily moving in the right direction. One of the things you mentioned was the computer system, our child welfare, it's called CWIS, workforce system. We have put our RFP in for the feds to review it so we can finally post it. So there are things that are happening. It's just that things are not always as quick as we would like. And another thing I would point out is since we are responsible for the entire system of care, there's some issues that are not necessarily directly within our control that do have an impact on our ability to serve youth, such as outside vendors being stable enough to handle our youth, uh, different things in terms of even out of state placements. Are there enough placements available to house our youth? There's a lot of things that go on that we can't necessarily guarantee are going to be fully stable because they're not well within our control. But I can say that those things that we are working on, we are definitely making progress on. We just want to be transparent that, we can't necessarily guarantee it. I'm hoping Tyler and Lindy, since you both have been involved with writing the report, if you'd like to add in.
I would love to add in. So I do have some thoughts on the matter. I don't think any of the, I am quite sure that none of the efforts that we write about in these regular reports are going to slow down at all moving forward, and regardless of whether or not they're to be reported on. And I think the drive to move forward all those initiatives regarding our systems of care, and I say systems of care because I'm not only referring to the high-end system of care, but when we think, Deputy Commissioner Radke mentioned foster care across the state. We're trying to organize efforts around how can we recruit more heavily into foster care and shared living providers because we're looking for home-based environments. That's certainly part of our system of care. It's something we need to stabilize our workforce and to kind of add to the overall security and positivity of the experience of youths we serve. There are other things that we didn't specifically put out there as those 5 that are very relevant. So what we see is it's not uncommon to have youth with medical complications that are in need of DCF's custody, and we are trying to find appropriate placements for them, but we're trying to coordinate that with needed medical efforts. We don't specifically call that out previously, but that is part of our system of care that we're also trying to strengthen. When we consider what youth with developmental needs are, there is some of that called out in the report, but I think we have solutions that we're trying to advance in partnership with Dale and through agency-wide efforts that are, outside of what we've been originally identifying as what is needed to be successful with Raise the Age. So I think there are many efforts that are looking to expand our systems of care in a healthy way so that we can be primed to be able to kind of open the doors to a Raise the Age population really successfully. And those won't slow down on any front, I think, regardless of what happens this legislative session.
I'll also add that, and this is also in the report, but as we've mentioned today, this isn't about just the expansion and the additional population of 18 and 19-year-olds. It's about how we serve all of the youth that we're mandated to serve. And that's also what the report is trying to address. And so as Tyler mentioned, when we're talking about our system of care, it's not just the secure placement or BCIM beds, it's about the entire population. So when we talk about BARGE, certainly exploring efforts for increasing their capacity to take on some of the probation cases from our case workers so that they can focus on some of the higher risk, higher need youth is another way that we're looking at trying to create a healthier system to respond to all of the youth that we're serving. So certainly efforts will continue in this vein to try to make sure that we're able to provide the best opportunities to the workforce and the youth.
You good?
Sure.
So this does bring bring to the forefront, a reporting requirement, which we don't have in here. And I know that you've said that you like less reports, everybody would, but I think we're going to need to have something, but obviously not as frequent. If we're going to give over 2 years, we're going to want to see what progress is being made. So I could imagine during that over 2 year period, having like 3 reporting times. Because we know the format of the report, and part of the reason I say that is it's been very helpful for me to, with being on Joint Justice Oversight, to have been able to track what the efforts have been, and it has made me more comfortable that that the work, folks have been trying really hard, and we're just not ready. And I think it will be critical for us to continue to understand that that's the case. So expect that we will in the next version of this have that same reporting requirement, but we'll figure out as far as timing. Maybe it's every 6 months or something like that, rather than every 2 months.
Yeah. So previous when this went into effect for the 18-year-olds, there was an annual report that was filed from the department because we had a 2-year window between 18 and 19-year-olds. So just throw that out as a suggestion. Just that that's what they followed the first time around. If that's helpful.
All right, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. Other questions for the DCF? I think we're good. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and we'll probably be making some further changes after we have the testimony today and tomorrow, and we'll probably have some group of you or somebody representing DCF back sometime next week to hopefully wrap this up so we can move it over to the Senate in time for that to move. So appreciate that, and we'll go to Matthew Bernstein if you can join us. And after the child advocate, we will take a break and then go to Marshall. Over to you. Yeah, well,
Peter, I do not.
Yeah. Relax.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Matthew Bernstein, the Child, Youth, and Family Advocate for the state of Vermont. And I do not have a PowerPoint today. I'm going to be brief because you've already heard from our office 3 times on this matter. This is the 4th time in 2025. And our testimony has not changed significantly. In terms of H2, I just wanted to put on the record, we testified in favor of this bill on January 17th, 2025 in its previous version. With the amendment, essentially, we oppose everything that you've added since then. So we still support the raising the minimum age from 10 to 12. But the rest of it, I cannot say we support. So I would like to read some excerpts from a letter that we sent to DCF on February 6, 2024. I've submitted it to Nate. I'm not sure if it's.
Yeah, before you do that, so section 2, where we're raising the outside age of for how long family court has the jurisdiction, you're also opposed to that. I just want to make sure that that's clear, because that would.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
And I guess that is because I think that cuts against the stated intention of reducing workload on DCF, unless I'm missing something.
Okay, all right.
So we sent this letter almost exactly a year ago on February 6, 2024. It's a letter to DCF, but it was meant as an open letter, and it was submitted as part of our joint justice testimony after that. And I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts from page 1, and then I just have a couple of sort of guiding questions after that, and then we can wrap up. So this was to Commissioner Winters, Deputy Commissioner Radke, and Adolescent Services Director Tyler Allen. So I'm on page 1 if you're looking at it. It says, pursuant to this office's statutory obligation to work in collaboration with relevant parties to strengthen services for children, youth, and families, and to provide systemic information concerning child, youth, and family welfare to the public, the governor, state agencies, legislators, and others as necessary, we write in response to your December 1st, 2023 Act 23 report, which was the prior delay to Act 125, in which you requested that the Vermont legislature indefinitely pause Vermont's landmark raise the age law. Our response to your report can be summarized as follows. 1, as your report makes clear, DCF unquestionably needs more support to bolster its workforce build a stronger continuum of care, and connect young people with age-appropriate services that promote public safety. Two, despite these challenges, the available evidence strongly indicates that there's no need to pause raise the age at all. So I'm going to go to page 2 now on the second complete paragraph. Our office strongly supports, this is your DCF's call in the Act 23 report for at least 6 new FSW positions, an expansion of restorative justice funding, a new data system, and increased treatment capacity. We stand as DCF's partners in pushing for those reforms because we believe they will ultimately improve the welfare of Vermont's most vulnerable children, youth, and families. In fact, we recommended many of these initiatives ourselves in our 2023 annual report. But we believe strongly that DCF should not seek to relieve these systemic pressures at the expense of our young people, which is exactly what a pause or a repeal, I'm adding, of Raise the Age would do. Raise the Age, or further delay. Raise the Age is nation-leading legislation that was enacted by the Vermont General Assembly after years of careful consideration. It is data-driven, based in consensus brain science, and according to DCF's own words, created with a multitude of partners, stakeholders, and subject matter experts in the development of an implementation plan. Raise the Age is one part of a set of comprehensive criminal justice reforms in Vermont that have shown success in promoting public safety, reducing recidivism, and supporting young people. We call on you as leaders of DCF to reframe Vermont's systemic needs to focus on the most urgent problems our state faces. We should prioritize prevention, treatment, and family preservation rather than criminalization and an overemphasis on secure facilities. We understand that DCF is in crisis and that every day you must make hard choices about where to place the children in your care, especially those in foster care. We recognize that fear-based rhetoric in the political and popular discourse has promoted crisis-driven policymaking. We also know that DCF cannot make positive systemic changes on its own. It needs support from AHS, the legislature, the governor, the courts, and even this office. But we feel strongly that DCF should actively push against the narratives that juvenile crime is out of control, Raise the Age is overly burdensome, and secure facilities will remedy the problems you mentioned in your report. And I'm just going to read the wrap-up part here, which says, thank you for your attention. While we strongly disagree with your request to pause Raise the Age, we know you share our commitment to Vermont's young people. We remain ready to support all key stakeholders, including DCF, when the changes to Raise the Age go into effect this July 1st. That was last July 1st.
Question from Ken. Go ahead, Ken.
You used the word fear factor, I think I heard in there. What did you mean by that?
What I mean by that is, I think there is an understandable worry because of a few very serious and absolutely understandably concerning cases that juvenile crime is out of control, that probation violations, which have been part of this discussion, are a significant problem. And I think that those few cases, which again, I think are very concerning, right? That's what we've consistently said. I think those have stood as a proxy for a bigger problem, which I don't think exists. And I think this legislation solves a problem that is essentially, that is a small problem with a sledgehammer of a solution that walks us backwards. And I think the issue for me is that the stated problems that we're trying to solve, again, as I said before, my concern is that this legislation and in general, this approach is not going to solve those problems. That's my concern, is that I think our communities should be safer. I think we should prevent drugs from coming into the state. I think people have a right to be safe in their communities. I think even the small crimes like, you know, the car thefts and the retail thefts, I think those are a problem, but I don't think this is going to remedy that. So that's what I think has seeped into. I think it is a very challenging time to be alive. I feel that every day. And, you know, I feel that with my own children, I feel that economically, and I'm, you know, incredibly privileged. So I can't imagine what, you know, people who have less privilege than me feel. But I think that this way of addressing the problem, I think, unfortunately, is going to take a lot of time. And I think it is not going to address the problem in a way that's going to be lasting.
So you kind of lost me here, but then again, I get lost easy. But everything you just said confirms the reason why I want to keep the age where it is, that we shouldn't be raising the age. Everything you just said, you just brought up the reasons why not to raise the age, including your own public safety or your kids' public safety. So I'm having a hard time understanding why, which I guess I realize it's your job, but it's it's still, we need to do. We've dealt with this for years. Everybody's saying it's not the time to do it. The governor has admitted he made a mistake in going with it. We're hearing testimony after testimony after testimony not to do it. What you just said, and I don't want to keep beating this horse, but it's like it's pretty much clear cut. Don't raise the age. We're not ready. And this other thing, and if I just might step, I don't want this to come out the wrong way, but I'm not sure when certain people's brains ever develop. Possibly my own.
I've taken a long time to mature myself. I can relate to what you're saying. I think honestly, we have a lot we agree on in terms of the goals. I think the disagreement is in the policy choices of how to get there. And I think that's a legitimate discussion. And that's why we're here. As you said, that's my job. I do think in regards to, and Chair Lalonde, I heard you say this as well, that it's, I forget your exact quote from last week, but it was essentially like, almost everybody wants, like you said, wants to delay, raise the age. And I have these questions that I wanted to get to here, but one of them is, I think that feeling of consensus is partly a function of who you are having sitting in this chair.
Okay, so, man,
You may.
let's take the politics out of it. Take the politics right out of it.
Agreed.
Isn't it the right thing to do?
What is?
Not
First, let me
raise the age.
say this office is statutorily nonpartisan, and I take that very seriously. And I don't think this is a debate about. I think there's a lot of bipartisanship here in every direction. You said, isn't it a right thing? I guess the question is, what's the it you're talking about?
We're hearing everything. We're hearing very little from any place, and I'm glad I'm starting a whole public discussion around this table here on this. But we're hearing everything not to raise it, yet we keep getting bombarded to raise it. And it's like, I'm really concerned about the public safety aspect of it, not only of the young people that are involved in this, but everybody in general. That's my fear, if that makes any sense.
I think, as I said, I think we agree on the ends we are seeking here. I think the disagreement is in how we get there. And I think that's a policy disagreement, and that's.
Well, that's nothing unusual.
No, that's why we're here. That's this process, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So Karen and then Ian.
I was going to potentially offer a shift because I certainly understand the view of not supporting these changes and wanting it to go through. And I think there is momentum to move forward with a compromised, revised plan. So I'm curious if you have thoughts, even if you're like, I don't want to see this, I want it to go back to the original. Can your office provide feedback on the changes if they were to move forward? Because I think if we are going to do it, like, right, there's one thing, like, just don't do it. But then if we're going to make these changes, I really want to make sure we're doing them in a thoughtful way. And even if they're not the ideal that you want, can we get your input on how to make them the best as possible?
I really understand that question, and I offer the utmost respect when I answer this. I'm not sure that is my role, and we want to work with folks on, but there comes a point where we have statutory constituencies that we have to represent. And the problem with this is I don't think we can engage in that thoughtfulness and still represent the constituencies. That's not our office's role, right? Our office is to represent children, youth, and families in this discussion. And I think Marshall Paul and others are better at the technical aspects of it. I will say our annual report has a lot of ideas for ways we could address these problems that's not this legislation that are constructive, I think. So I don't want to say that I think as written right now, I went through each section of this and I listened to the discussion, and if you have a more specific question, I guess I could answer it. But right now, if you ask me section by section, I might just say, I'm not sure I can support that in any way.
So
I'm sorry.
that's helpful
Yeah.
context to have with it. And I guess I would throw out to, I don't have a specific question, but if there are pieces of that we could add to this, I know your piece is gonna be like, implement it right now. But if there are other things, I feel like, I'm guessing we have an appetite to consider them. I don't know what they would be, but
Yeah,
I think we want to address, we're understanding that we're coming short on the original goal of this. And so,
I appreciate that.
yeah.
I appreciate that. In our annual report, we have, one thing I guess would be, I think that, that young people who are in locked facilities and even, the couple of levels below locked facilities in residential care, I think they could use more resources and more, their voice could be heard better. And, we've had a couple of ideas for how to do that. We've submitted a couple of grants. Some are outstanding. For example, and this would be a collaboration with, I think, the Defender General and others, reaching out to every youth, making sure that every youth in every residential treatment facility, knows their rights, has access to contact information for somebody they can ask questions to. The facility understands that they have a right to call. Somebody visits all of them, even the folks out of state who is not DC. I mean, DCF needs to visit too, and that's important. But also somebody who is more independent and somebody who can represent the youth's interests more directly. Is, I guess, what I would say. So those are the kinds of ideas that I think might be. But there's other ideas in our annual report. So yeah.
Which was just, I think, submitted today or yesterday, I think.
It was submitted December 1st, 2024, Chair Lalonde. Yes, it was. Yes, I have copies here. I have copies if anybody would like one. I have paper copies, full color.
Mine's on the printer. I forgot to pick it up. So I did print it off as soon as I saw it. Was excited.
Yes, we've been much delayed. We finished it. It is brief, but I think it cuts right to some of these pithy ideas that would help.
Two quick questions. First, so you don't support anything in sort of the amended H2 that we're talking about. For the accountability one, does your office not support it because it's not constitutional? Because it's a pretty reasonable.
Sorry, what's the accountability one? Could you?
Section 12.
Section 12, but around trying to transfer out of juvenile court. We heard a lot of testimony about this issue where people sort of age out, and if there wasn't any kind of way to hold them in, they could just not sort of comply, and then it would eventually just age out. So
yes. I think number one, I would defer to folks who have a better technical understanding of it, such as Defender Paul. Number two, we oppose. I mean, some I think have objected to our office's use of the word criminalization. But that is, I think, literally what this is, right? It is youth who start out in the family court and then go to the criminal court. And so, as we've said, the data shows, and so, young people need support. Their brains are developed. The data shows that what they need is support and multiple chances for success for those low level crimes. As I said earlier, I don't see a huge problem. I hear anecdotal evidence that young people aren't accountable to their probation agreements. I think, I don't see a lot of hard data on that. I don't know what the scope of the problem is. I see young people who have this issue, but also I think that part of that misses one of the points, which is that those folks who are not charged as youthful offender or the big 11+3 for relatively low level crimes, the stakes are not nearly as high for them, or else they would have been charged with those other things. Yes, they need to comply with their services, but I just haven't seen an articulation. Those aren't the folks trafficking drugs through the state, right? Those aren't the folks who are engaging in serious violence from my perspective. I haven't seen any data that they are. And so the probation terms that they are in violation of, to me, aren't significant safety issues as far as I understand. So that's a longer answer to your question.
Yeah, okay. So I guess we were
but also the unconstitutional part too.
Well, yeah, that's a pretty reasonable. I think, and we were trying to sort of capture a subset of youth in this.
Yeah.
It wasn't everybody, because I think the testimony we heard was about 18-year-olds who are really there wasn't a lot of time for them to have the opportunity to comply with their conditions of probation, and they could just age out. Yeah.
So I think I hear.
I mean, I guess to flip that around, I'm working with a youth right now who's in DCF custody, who is actually charged as a youthful offender, who's about to be 18 and is having some struggles. And that person, actually, DCF has actually been incredibly supportive of that young person and has given that young person multiple chances, even when objectively a person might say they didn't deserve those multiple chances because they engaged in some concerning behavior. So my, and that is exactly how I think that youth should be treated. And this person is like on the precipice between achieving stability with a family member in another state and having 2 felonies and sinking into the criminal justice system. And so the issue with that is really, what support does that young person have? What does their network look like? It's not the law and what are the options. If DCF wanted, they could absolutely drop the hammer and have 2 felonies on this young person, I think relatively rapidly, with vigorous defense from the Defender General, of course. But so I don't think that's the issue. I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is we lack appropriate services. There's a lot of instability in our communities. There's economic instability, all of those other things. It's not the legal framework that is the problem. I think there are plenty of mechanisms to hold young people accountable. And I just haven't seen a lot of data. I've heard a lot of anecdotes. I haven't seen a lot of hard data that really fleshes this out, as this is the problem we're trying to address. And that relates to what I said earlier about.
And then, thank you.
One problem we're trying to solve. Yes, sorry.
And then
you keep asking questions.
No, and it was just before you get to your questions. My whole other question is, and I think I'm just trying to grasp your role or your office's role. So I think rigorous advocacy for you, for the youth family, like I get it. I don't understand how rigorous advocacy can't incorporate the testimony that we heard around the preparedness of DCF to take on 19-year-olds. So, right, like if we're being told that the agency that's going to be responsible for raise the age isn't ready and that youth might be harmed by trying to move it forward where it's happening right now. I don't understand how could your office and your advocacy incorporate that as instead of just saying full steam ahead, raise the age on April 1st. If we're being told that if you do that, it could have disastrous consequences for youth. Is that not a part of?
I mean, our job is to, I mean, you can read our statute. It's specific about this, but our job is to assess, provide recommendations in an independent manner, services that, among other things, services that DCF provides.
Okay.
And again, I think it's a disagreement about the way to address the problem, not that there's a problem. Maybe you could disagree about scope. I think one reason why there aren't those services is because DCF hasn't developed those services. And it is incumbent on them to do so through multiple statutory and constitutional motivations, right? The problem is, I don't want to say it's of their own making, but they have more control over it than I think the presentation has been to you all. And they have an obligation to do so, especially for the young people that are in their custody, meaning they are the legal parents.
Yeah.
They do not really have an option to say, we're not ready. We can't, they have an option to keep kids in their least restrictive setting. They have an option to, an obligation to keep kids in their least restrictive setting, an obligation to develop services, an obligation to ensure that children in foster care don't fall into the criminal justice system. So I just, again, we respect them. And as I read in that letter, they need support. But I think the reason, it's been 7 years, right? And Medicaid and Title 4E, we think that we could be drawing down $1.75 million every year just through Title 4E legal services because of a change in federal legislation, which is partly related, but only very partly related to that data system. So those are the kinds of problems. I mean, if I came in here and said I have, $1.5 million to address this problem, right? Would DCF still say we can't do it? We're under resourced. I don't know, but it's we just disagree with their ability to handle this, and it's already been implemented in the first phase, and the sky did not fall. I think it has been very well integrated and very successful, and I think a lot of I heard sort of a negative mention of this is like, we're the only state in the nation that's goes up to 19 for our juvenile justice system. But I think there is a very positive spin on that, which is that we are currently leading the nation. And what this proposal does is walk this back. And I think that takes Vermont backwards from that important place that we got to. And I think that all of that research that I mentioned that went into implementing this, read it. It is significant. I mean, there was so many national experts. What I hear happening in this debate is I hear a strong law enforcement and prosecutorial perspective on this. And again, they have every right to come in here and give their perspective, but I don't think the debate is significantly round. And I don't think you all have gotten a clear picture of really what's going on, even if we agree on the goals.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess that I would be happy to hear from other people that you think we should follow about everybody else.
Right, great. Barbara has a question first before you get to your questions.
So, I mean, you hit the nail on the head of one of the things I wanted to ask you about is not having the resources in place. And what I am trying to figure out is a way to not in 2 years, if we pass this, be sitting here and having what changed?
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, and I was thinking about that when DCF was asking about the reporting. It's like, if there were specific sort of things that need to be funded, that it's like, what are we doing to put that funding in place? And I'm not sure it's DCF that needs to answer that because. So I'm just wondering if you have a thought about shifting shifting it. So we're not, right. Like, I feel like I'm just hitting my head against the wall.
No, well, this is another, I think, going back to Representative Dolan's question too. I think another thing that would be useful here, because I really don't want you all to take away that I think this is easy, right? Or that there's a simple solution to this, because the systems of care that Deputy Commissioner Radke mentioned, those are complex, absolutely. And this work is very challenging. I think, again, part of the frustration here is that there's a lot of hard work going into the system of care right now, but from our perspective, it is mostly at the deepest end of the system. It is very hard to build a youth facility, a locked facility. It is very hard to stand up residential care, et cetera. So it's going to be hard no matter what. And that gets back to these obligations. I think one thing to add to that list would be some real, and this is a recommendation in our 2024 annual report, some real Medicaid, bringing in some money to bring in an outside expert on Medicaid and child welfare and juvenile justice, because Medicaid is really is one of the keys here to drawing down federal money to developing these programs. And it is very complex, and you need an outside expert, and it's totally understandable that DCF doesn't have somebody like that. I mean, they do have people who know about this stuff, but you need all of the help you can get.
And when I worked in the mental health system, there were Medicaid waivers that were available for really high-end kids in the mental health system. And I'm not sure if those are being used still, and I'm just not hearing about them because that's not my world. But it was, we used to have these LIP meetings where it would be Ed, DCF, and mental health at the table, figuring out how we were funding the kids. And I don't know, I feel like we're not doing that. And of course, we don't know federally what's happening, right? But on the other hand, we have a responsibility to figure out how to take care of our kids. And the answer can't be the resources didn't get appropriated.
So there are many waivers. There's the 1115 waiver. There's but the EPSDT, early periodic screening, diagnosis, and treatment, which is the Medicaid entitlement for 0 to 22, is a very powerful tool.
Yes.
And there's a bill in HHS actually that addresses some of these issues more on the adult side, and that's sort of on my long list to address. But I think that would be another thing that would really potentially make a difference. And
there were some states that have really cracked it, because I remember meeting with the health department 15 years ago, trying to figure out how to access some of those funds.
Yeah. What is it called? Public Works Alliance in California has some really interesting stuff. We cited in our report. So, thank you, Chair. So I just where am I? Okay, let's see. I wanted to read these questions that I think I hope would guide you moving forward as you consider this. And it's again, another roundabout way of your question about, what we can contribute to this discussion. So will the legislation you are considering actually make our community safer, welcoming, and economically vibrant? Have you taken into account the disproportionate impact of the policies you are considering on non-white Vermonters, Vermonters with disabilities, and children in foster care? Relatedly, have you heard in this committee from the communities and people who are most impacted by this proposed legislation? How will we know if the changes you make to raise the age are successful? That is a big one, and I would ask that there be I would ask that if this does go through, that there is a constant reconsideration of what the impact is, how we measure it, and and is it working? Will this legislation ease the court backlog, the prosecutorial and defender capacity issues, and DCF caseloads and capacity issues? Will this legislation make it more likely or less likely that a young person who touches the juvenile justice system falls further into the criminal system, or will it enable young people to leave the criminal justice system behind and become successful? Will this legislation encourage young Vermonters to stay here and become successful adults? Will this legislation deter the movement of large quantities of drugs through our state? Does this bill reduce the complexity of the current system or increase it? Do you fully understand the system? Do you fully understand the system as it currently functions and the one that will be created if you pass this legislation? And that is really no shade to you because, I'm a lawyer and I don't work in this, in the juvenile justice system every day as an active attorney representing clients. But I do, read these statutes quite a bit, and I find it very, very hard to keep track of. And I think, and I know there was discussion about this last week, and Representative Harvey, I appreciated your perspective. That it is very hard to understand, and I think that is, an issue. And I think, especially if we're talking about coming back and doing another comprehensive change next year, I just would question about the energy we're spending right now. So those are my questions. I have copies of my annual report, pages 18 through 21, address some of the things we've talked about today. If there's any other questions, please go ahead, and thank you for your time.
Questions? Other questions for me? Angela, go ahead.
Did you, the list of questions that you just shared, did you submit that as well?
I have not yet. I can. Yes, I will.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. We will take